Welcome to Sacred Cow Shipyards, where no ship is safe from being called a piece of ship. Yes, you did in fact read that right. This episode will be nearly 2 hours long, if not over 2 hours, depending on how long I talk in certain cases. Why, you ask? Well, didn't actually start out this way. This was not my intention when I started this, but things have happened recently that are requiring me to relocate the shipyard precipitously. It's going to take some time. This might be my last episode for a while, or the next one might be, or I might just disappear randomly in the middle of an episode. It's hard to say at this point. So consider this a down payment on the future, I suppose. And what a down payment it is. This is, in fact, a frequent fan request from all you squishies out there. So, yeah, you're welcome, I guess. Anyways, this week I will be watching the quote-unquote movie Battleship. Only I realized that there was just so very much to talk about that I'm actually going to watch the movie and talk about it simultaneously. Now, you're lucky. My commentary is about as long as the movie is itself, so it might be possible to watch the movie while listening to me simultaneously. I will caution you, though, that I will talk a great deal about even individual frames inside of individual scenes, and not at all about entire other scenes. So it might not make a whole lot of sense to listen to my commentary while you're watching it, so I'm going to provide you screen captures as I always do. So without further ado, let us examine a movie, a three-dimensional, supposedly realistic movie based off of a two-dimensional grid-based board game that you play with your children. First off, Derpy McDerperson here is exactly correct. Your planet is remarkably lucky, in fact, your species, your planet as a whole, everything on your planet is remarkably lucky to have not attracted the significant attention of very many extraterrestrial species out there. Because, yeah, any species that can make the trip to your planet could, just erase your species and not even notice they had done it. So his Columbus and Indian analogy isn't technically wrong, but it is not exactly right either, simply because it is too weak of an analogy. The aliens would just remove you because you're in the way of them. It's part of the reason why Independence Day didn't make a whole lot of sense as it was. Why didn't they just remove the population? They're going to be dicks about it anyways. Moving on to this absolutely ridiculous piece of magical technology. So for those of y'all who are lucky enough to not have seen this movie yet, the basic premise is that there is a ground-based transmitter sending a signal up to the satellite, which is then going to quote-unquote amplify it and send it off into space. Okay, there are so many problems with that plan. First, why is the signal visible? Why would it be using a visible laser link to get the information up to the satellite? Could be disrupted by clouds, for God's sake. Second, satellites, on average, do not have bigger power plants than ground-based systems. Now, yes, they have less interference by way of being outside of the EM field of the planet, or at least farther out of the EM field of the planet, and they don't have to go through the atmosphere, but still, unless they deliberately lofted the mother of all nuclear power plants, which is going to be causing all kinds of other problems with your species and their various laws, that satellite's not going to be able to amplify it. And without that orbital nuclear power plant, it's going to run smack dab into the inverse square law, which is a right proper bitch. And for those of y'all out there who are not physicists, basically the intensity of a radio signal or any kind of EM transmission at all is proportional to 1 over the distance squared. So basically, the further you get from a transmission source, the very much more quiet it gets on a geometric scale. So yeah, even if this thing was like collimating the signal and pumping all the energy into it possibly could, it's still going to get a lot weaker over distance. It's just going to fall apart. It diffuses, basically. And then on top of that, you're still talking about interstellar distances using your primitive technology, which is limited by light speed. Your closest star system is what? Not quite 4.5 light years from your sun. So this signal would travel for 4.5 years before anyone even noticed it if you actually aimed it right, which is the entire premise of this stupid little amplification system, is it's like throwing out a dart of a signal. It is trying to collimate it and try to keep it as tight and cohesive as possible. Now on interstellar distances, even 1 degree of separation is going to cause a massive scatter effect. So I guess if you hit the entire system, it'll work just fine. But still, how fast do you expect these people to get back to you? Well, I guess that's part of the show, so let's keep watching. Because as you continue to watch, you get introduced to the no joke, Joe Schmuckatelli. Well, that's actually not the character's name. I don't actually know the character's name. But anyways, the whole backstory of this guy breaking into a gas station by way of the roof to get some random female of his species a microwave chicken burrito is like the most classic Schmuckatelli story ever. And if you don't know who Joe Schmuckatelli is, clearly you need to go watch the appropriate episode, you slackers. But while Taylor Kitsch is on screen here in all of his thirsty glory, I would like to state for the record that it is a goddamn travesty that there has not been a sequel to his John Carter movie. The John Carter universe, for those of you who do not know, is a vibrant, rich, and deep universe written by the basic father of modern pulp science fiction. It is glorious. And his movie, in which he stars as the eponymous John Carter, is probably one of the best adaptations ever. Mostly because another adaptation is basically a soft porn, so low bar and damning with faint praise and all that good nonsense. Anyways, it's a great movie. You should watch it when you get the chance. And you should complain to whoever you can complain to that there hasn't been a sequel, because man, what a world. And speaking of other kinds of stereotypes, we have not John Carter's big brother here being the very best turbo he possibly can be. For those of y'all who don't know, and by which I mean to say people who don't hang around United States Marine Corps individuals, turbos are otherwise known as hard chargers in your United States Navy, and the closest analogy in civilian terms is try-hard. Basically, they eat, sleep, and crap motivation. They are the always up earliest, always dressed perfectly, everything always lined up exactly correct individuals. Now, I mean, does that actually result in them getting ahead in their careers and so on and so forth? The movie would have you believe yes. Reality, it's complicated. I am aware of some commanding officers for some very large ships who are some of the most chill individuals you would ever have the opportunity to meet. I am also aware of other commanding officers who told foreign ship pilots on the commanding officer's bridge in front of his entire crew that this ship was just a practice ship for when he got his real ship, by which he meant an aircraft carrier. So, yeah. The U.S. Navy has a lot of interesting people in a lot of different positions. You'll get used to it if you ever end up there yourself, I imagine. And speaking of the U.S. Navy, of course Turbo's solution to his little brother being a f*** up is for little brother to join him in the U.S. Navy, and this is where the timeline entirely falls apart. You see, little brother didn't just join the Navy. He actually somehow ended up being a lieutenant, an officer, a commissioned officer. The problem with that is there's only basically, technically, 5-ish ways to achieve that position. The first and the most obvious one, of course, is the United States Naval Academy, which naturally produces ring knockers. That is to say, officers who are so very proud of having gone to Canoe U that they have this big old glorious ring on their ring finger that they knock on the table periodically to remind everyone that they came from the Naval Academy. Congratulations! An alternative to the systemic psychological and physical abuse of the Naval Academy is, of course, the Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps. That is to say, you can attend a quote-unquote normal college and or university who has an NROTC unit and be attached to that NROTC unit, and that unit will pay for most of your college education with the caveat that you then pay back by way of, serving in the Navy. This has an added complication of having, naval-related classes piled on top of your normal class load, and a couple other things on top of that, but it doesn't involve, having your fucking dorm room tossed every goddamn week. A third option, which is kind of interesting, is that you already have a college degree, because, yes, the United States Naval Academy produces a human being that has a college degree attached to him. And the Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps also produces a human being that has a degree already attached to him. But if you already have a degree attached to you, then you can come in through what's called the Officer Candidate School. This is basically the fire hose method, where, yes, if you went in through the previous two methods, you had 4 years to unfuck yourself to get yourself used to being an officer in the Navy, whereas in OCS, you have approximately 12 weeks. Good luck. Now, I mean, as much as the Naval Academy graduates kind of rule the Navy, it's kind of interesting what came out of OCS for you Humies. Notably, a whole butt ton of astronauts, and in fact, one of your chief of naval operations. So OCS isn't that bad of a way to go, I guess, depending on a lot of specific details. And details kind of lead us to the fourth method of getting a commission in the United States Navy, and that is to say the direct commission route. This is complicated. Basically, if you are an absolute goddamn expert in whatever field you are in and the Navy needs more of you, then the Navy is willing to offer you a quote-unquote direct commission. That is to say, you will be an officer skipping through all of the necessary details to become an officer because basically officers pay better. And the Navy knows that they can't attract, talent without paying well enough. So if you're, a chaplain or a lawyer or a medical kind of person and you want to get into the Navy, this is basically how it happens. They basically say that, yea, verily, you are an officer. You're not a line officer. That is to say, you're not in the chain of command per se, but you are a person whose skills we need. So congratulations. Yea, verily, you are an officer. Yea, you. And those are frequently called limited duty officers, which does not at all lead us to the final and fifth major category or route of becoming an officer in the Navy, and that is actually by way of being an enlisted person. Yes, you heard that right. You can enlist in the Navy, and if you are badass enough and hot enough and so very awesome enough, you can apply to go through either NROTC or OCS and become a commissioned officer in the United States Navy. It is complicated, it's hard, it is really difficult to get into that program, but it does technically exist. And the difficulty is basically what I'm driving towards right now. God love me for taking this tangent. Basically, all officers in the U.S. Navy require college degrees, whether you are an actual, line officer or whether you're a dentist or whatever. You have to have a college degree to be an officer. And the younger brother in this movie already did not have a college degree. So congratulations, that's 4 years right there. And the next time we see him, he's a lieutenant, and that's another 4 years. And, well, that's only 8 years. Which I guess is my point from earlier, where the closest star system you have is 4.5 light years away. So based off of your light speed limited radio technology, they just got your message and were doing something back, and it took 9 years, even if they responded immediately. And we're now, 8 years later. There's some physics going wrong right now. Now, moving on from that ridiculously enormous tangent, yes, RIMPAC actually is a thing. It is the Rim of the Pacific exercise, and yes, it happens every other year on the even numbered of years during June or July, sometimes maybe August, depending on schedule. And yes, it is a multinational operation, mostly between the US and the Japanese, but also between any other country willing to play who has, ports on the rim of your Pacific Ocean. So amusingly, this is one of the very few things that the movie actually got right. Now, what's interesting about this particular shot is that it's unclear how the alien invaders got from their system to your system. Maybe they slow-boated it. Maybe they FTL'd. Maybe those blinks you saw are their jump gates, collapsing or whatever. And this is where, again, the timeline of the movie gets kind of wonky. And I keep bouncing back and forth between, the hypothetical science fiction aspects of this and the realistic nautical Navy aspects of this, because that's basically how the movie works. Deal with it. And speaking of the Navy side of things, the Navy really doesn't care if you wear sunglasses. It doesn't. As long as you wear sunglasses that are conservative and not, ostentatious, and they don't have colored lenses. They have to have black lenses and mostly black frames or at least metal frames. Yeah, the Navy doesn't really care about shades, as the characters keep talking about. It's just not a thing, and I don't know why it was a thing for the movie, aside from, highlighting how much of a bad boy this character was. But speaking of weird Navy nautical traditions, it is considered to be kind of impolite to refer to the captain of a ship as anything other than, captain. And yes, for a while there, not too long ago, in fact, your United States Navy had Lieutenant captains. That is to say, their technical rank was lieutenant, but their position was in fact captain of a ship. And they were referred to as captain, even though their rank was not actually captain, because they were a captain of a ship. And this is fundamentally the difference, I guess, between the notion of earned rank and positional rank. Yes, the lieutenant captain earned the rank of lieutenant. He was also positionally the captain of a ship, and he actually earned that position too, but it's still not his rank. So yeah, referring to a captain of a ship as Commander Hopper is a little denigrating, not to be, unkind to that particular admiral, but yeah, he fucked up. And speaking of admirals and commanding officers and so on and so forth, you want to know the easy way to pick out a commanding officer in the, sea of U.S. naval officers in their summer whites? Look for the scrambled eggs. Yes, the scrambled eggs. That weird kind of gold leaf, whatever the hell is going on their brim? Yeah, that's a surefire indicator that they are a commanding officer. Because Lord knows that commanding officers love them some gold or something. I don't know. It's old tradition. Deal with it. Now, see, this part is even more complicated than even tradition, because it's just complicated. Your United States Navy operates on a legal system called the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and it is radically different from what you civilians might think you believe you understand. Notably, striking a senior officer is a punishable offense, regardless of whether or not the senior officer actually wants to press charges. There, in fact, isn't really a concept of pressing charges under the UCMJ. You did it, and therefore it is punishable. That is how the universe works. There doesn't have to be an appellant, there doesn't have to be a defendant, there doesn't have to be anything. You struck a senior officer. You should not have done that. You should be punished for that. And that is literally the entire quote-unquote thought process of your UCMJ. So yeah, the senior officer here is trying to make noises about defending the junior officer because the senior officer didn't want it to be known that he got his ass kicked by a junior officer. It doesn't matter in the light of the UCMJ. The junior officer struck a senior officer. Thou shalt not. Thou shalt be punished now. And, well, that gets more complicated. But before it gets too much more complicated, I would like to point out one of the very many reasons why this movie pisses me the fuck off. You see, that admiral is wearing a fucking board of ribbons. They're amazing ribbons, and all of it is right. It's fucking frustrating. Because, well, no, I mean, those ribbons aren't what I would honestly expect out of a 4-star admiral, honestly. But the ribbons are in the right order. There is a hierarchy for ribbons. There is an order they happen in. And they got the goddamn fucking order right. They couldn't get any fucking thing else right, but they got the fucking ribbons right. God damn it. And also they got the warfare pins and the command pins and everything else right too. So fuck them. They couldn't get anything fucking else right, but they got that right. Why? Okay, fine. If I had lungs, I'd be taking a deep breath right now. Because this next scene actually, ironically, somehow, makes up for the last scene and kind of gives us some interesting information about the situation. First off, you will note that Lieutenant Hopper here has both a gold pin and a silver pin above and below his U.S. Navy name tape bullshit. Why is that, you ask? Those are his qualification pins. On the left side of all you Humies' chests in your United States Navy are your qualification pins, and the gold one indicates that he is a surface warfare officer, and the silver one, in fact, indicates that he is also an enlisted surface warfare specialist, which means he did actually enlist first, stay enlisted long enough to get a college degree, apply to either OCS or NROTC, probably OCS, and go through that process to earn his commission in the United States Navy. In other words, Lieutenant Hopper here is what is occasionally known as a Mustang, or prior enlisted individual. But that's actually not why I'm highlighting this particular scene. This scene is actually one of the healthiest representations of the relationship between a division officer and his chief that I have ever actually seen on movies or television shows or whatever. And I understand how that might be a complicated concept for all you civilians out there, so let me Barney break this down for you. Put simply, your United States Navy runs on chiefs. And those are chief petty officers. And those are basically senior enlisted personnel. When enlisted personnel start, they start out as seamen, They move up through the seaman ranks, and then they become petty officers. And they move up through the petty officer ranks, and then they become chief petty officers. And chiefs are a special breed unto themselves. They are specialists. They are experts. They are subject matter experts. They are the people you go to when you have a question about the thing that they specialize in. And unfortunately for them, one of the things they have to specialize in is forming naval officers. Yes, you heard that right. The senior enlisted personnel help create naval officers. They help forge them. They help make them into actual competent naval officers. And yes, that is by design. You see, most naval officers are goddamn dumbasses. I mean, I'm not even going to try to bandy words about it. They're just dumbasses. They're wet behind the ears. They don't have a goddamn clue what's going on, and they are functionally useless. And it is part of a chief's duties, unfortunately, to help fix that problem, to educate them, to form them, to help them deal with the junior enlisted people, the senior officers, to deal with their point in life. Because the chiefs know that these junior officers, any given junior officer, might one day be their commanding officers. So the chiefs know that they need to help this junior officer be a better commanding officer, because everyone always wants a better commanding officer. And this scene right here is, as I am told that some chiefs in your United States Navy might say, outstanding in the rain. Because yes, this chief right here is identifying that his division officer is having a problem, and he's trying to help, and the division officer is being a dick, and the chief is still trying to help, and the division officer is still being a dick. But the point is the chief is trying to help. Because that's what they do. It's unfortunately part of their job. They are not only responsible for managing their junior enlisted personnel, they are also responsible for crafting and forging and creating their, I guess, technically senior officer personnel, making them good officers, helping them become good officers. It's on-the-job training by brute force methods, yes, but it is essential because the Navy runs on chiefs. These guys know what they're doing. They know how to teach people. They know how to help people. They know how to do their specific jobs hands-on personally. The world runs on people like that. And if you don't understand that fundamental reality, you need to unfuck yourself right the fuck now. Now, what's funny is this scene is actually kind of complicated. You see, all military officers in your United States military serve at the pleasure of the president, and all of their commissions exist by way of a literal bill from Congress that the president signs off on. Now, it's basically a functionary, it basically just gets passed and signed and no one actually pays attention to it or cares, but it is literally an act of Congress that gives these people their commission. And by the same token, removing that commission is kind of complicated as well. Legal proceedings for officers are challenging. Basically, for enlisted personnel, there are such things as non-judicial punishments. It's basically a way for a commanding officer to hopefully correct an enlisted person who is having some, difficulty with life or the world around him. No such option really exists for officers. Officers can have letters of reprimand and so on and so forth, but in order for them to actually be faced with legal proceedings that would actually involve a judge advocate general or a JAG, that actually has to be like a legitimate legal wrongdoing. They have to have, killed someone or stolen something, or, well, actually UCMJ specifies a lot of things that are not normally crimes for your civilian side of law, but still, you have to actually commit a serious crime. And then it actually goes in front of a court martial. It's not just, JAG deciding they're kicking you out. No. You get your time and you get a panel of senior officers who get to judge your case, and then they pass down their decision. And I suppose if someone had the ear of some congressman or even the president, then maybe a commission could be revoked on an individual basis. But man, that would be remarkably rare and unusual and like almost has never happened before. So yeah, no, the Navy's kicking you out is not actually a thing necessarily for officers. You gotta go through a process for that, which they just entirely gloss past in this movie, because reasons. Now, speaking of reasons, I consider myself fortunate, I suppose, that I don't actually have to worry about losing limbs or appendages or whatever. I mean, it happens occasionally in my line of work, and we bolt a new one on, and I move on with my quote-unquote life. Let's go with life. The other explanation is so much more complicated. But you squishy humans are a different matter entirely. If something gets cut off of you or blown off of you or whatever, you can't just, grow it back, and you can't just bolt on a new one. You have this whole, rejection problem, from what I understand. It's complicated and annoying and frustrating. But what is perhaps more frustrating is how your various countries deal with people who have had this happen, especially people who have had this happen during their course of service to those countries. Now, yes, those countries, of course, do their level, quote-unquote, best to provide the, quote-unquote, best service to those amputee individuals. But the reality is, yeah, there are a lot of very unhappy ones out there, and I don't know if there is a solution. I don't know what that solution would look like, but I do know that your various countries could do to listen to these people and try to figure out what they are trying to tell you. Because, yeah, losing appendages for you humies is a big deal. And you would think that the countries for whom those appendages were lost might give a shit. But on average, they don't. And that's a goddamn shame. And on a completely unrelated note to my previous point, because this movie just keeps bouncing around, no, sailors are not actually allowed to make phone calls from their ships. You see, warships have this thing called MCON. Acronym. Always fun. Although this acronym isn't really an acronym per se. Anyways, MCON stands for Emission Control. It's a way of saying that, hey, we know we are a modern warship, and we know that we are going to be emitting radiation on various spectrums for radars, radios, blah, 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 so on and so forth. But we are going to emit the bare minimum possible. And that includes cell phones. Because cell phones, operate on one of your electromagnetic spectrums. So no, once a ship gets underway, if a sailor and or officer is caught trying to make a cell phone call from the weather decks of the ship, they are in a world of shit, because they are violating MCON, and it's annoying and frustrating. It's just plain stupid. So yeah, I don't know why they did that. But speaking of MCON, I'm also not sure why your planet would send out a massive fucking flag of, hey, everybody, we're right the fuck here. And we're about to get to that particular problem right about, now. I legitimately do not even know where to start with this absolute nonsense. So, first of all, these ships are supposed to be homing on the origination point of the signal that was blasted out into space way back earlier in the movie. Well, fine. The signal was blasted out from a satellite in orbit. It wasn't blasted out from Hawaii. And yet, for some reason, everyone is believing that the ships are homing in on Hawaii because that's where the signal came from. No. Well, yes, but also no. Yes, technically the signal did technically originate in Hawaii, but for the purposes of the interstellar transmission, the signal originated in low Earth orbit. So, yeah, once you retransmit a signal, you are the transmission origination for the new signal. Congratulations, you're the new target for the aliens. Wait, hold on, that's bad, right? Then even talking beyond the whole origination problem, yeah, if an object, an interstellar object at this point, came into your solar system and, deliberately separated itself into 5 segments that are controlling their vector and thrust and direction and so on and so forth, yeah, you bet your ass a lot of people would take notice. And it wouldn't be like, oh, that's interesting, because, I mean, yeah, your Skywatch is complicated and clouded, and there's a lot of stuff up there, but yeah, when stuff are coming in really, really hard and fast, and doing interesting maneuvers, yeah, even your stupid level of techs are going to notice. It's kind of a big deal. And, man, they really dragged out how very slow it took y'all to notice that, wow, those are ships and they are headed towards your planet. Good luck. Although, on the flip side, apparently those ships are flaming pieces of shit. So, well, I guess you might not be in that bad of a shape after all. I mean, seriously, these ships have crossed interstellar distances, possibly at FTL speeds, possibly they slow-boated it. And they are deliberately designed to make, well, what you squishy humans would categorize as hard landings in your ocean. And one of these ships was literally taken out by one of your orbiting satellites. The fuck, man? I mean, I'm not actually trying to be inconsiderate here or anything, but your satellites are basically aluminum foil held together by baling wire and good intentions. And these ships that are meant to make high-speed re-entries into, your planet's atmosphere, and then, land on your ocean at also high speeds and cross interstellar distances, winged one of these aluminum foil and baling wire satellites and crashed and died spectacularly because it winged a satellite. What? I mean, later in these movies, these ships can withstand your 5-inch guns from one of your DDGs, and it can't withstand a satellite. I mean, yeah, I get it. They're moving kind of fast at the moment, and the satellite isn't moving very fast, so maybe the energy difference is the problem in this particular case, but still, aluminum foil and baling wire. Come on! And just for, clarification, by a hard re-entry and landing in your ocean, I'm not saying that, they do your particular method of, burning up as much as possible in the upper atmosphere by slowing their descent using a heat shield of some sort, and then kind of cruising their way down to the point where they can deploy parachutes and just kind of, gently float to the ocean and then float there on top of the ocean waiting for a recovery boat to come pick them up. Oh, the fuck no! These things come auguring in at barely suborbital speeds and just go straight splat in your ocean. Wow. This is kind of a big deal. I mean, water is basically non-compressible. So if you hit it hard enough, it's basically like hitting, concrete or ground or something solid that does not give a flying fuck about you. And the same interstellar vehicles that got bagged and tagged by one of your baling wire and aluminum foil satellites can just bore straight into your ocean at barely suborbital velocities. Yeah, I ain't buying that, man. And even if that splatter matter's impact on your ocean wasn't enough to drive home just how sturdy these vehicles actually are, observe this photo and observe the small smudgy dot to the left of the very large column. That appears to be a great white of your sharks. Yeah, so let's do the math here. For every 10 meters in depth, or approximately 33 feet in depth, the water pressure goes up by 1 atmosphere. And in this shot, you can't actually see the top of the water, so you rest assured that the water is a fair distance up this, column that we're seeing in the ocean. So by the time you hit the bottom of this column, you're at a lot of atmospheres. It can withstand a lot of atmospheres. It can withstand hundreds of pounds of pressure per square inch of its hull. And it got taken out by a satellite. I still just can't get over that. The hell, man. And again, bouncing around because again we can, I would just like to call attention to this particular scene because this is the kind of thing that your United States Navy destroyers live for. Angles and speed and force and pointy tip of the spear. In fact, all of your destroyer's crews will always deny this particular apocryphal story, but there are quote-unquote stories about your United States Navy's destroyers lining up out in the middle of nowhere in the ocean and lining up with each other, bow lined up with bow, all engines stopped, and then staging races. Because they're destroyers. They're pointy tips of the spears. Fastest one wins, right? And the physics of it, depending on how creative people are particularly interesting. Because you see, your United States Navy's destroyers are twin-screw ships. More specifically, they are twin-screw gas turbine ships. So their shafts, and they have 2 of them, would that you were all so lucky, they always spin in the same direction all the time, whether or not the ship is going forward or backwards, courtesy of those shafts ending in variable pitch propellers. So basically, if the ship wants to go backwards, the blades on the propellers just kind of change their angle radically. And if they want to go forward, they change their angle radically the other way. And depending on how fast the shaft is spinning and how broadly pitched those blades are, that determines how fast the ship is moving. So the cheaty way of doing these races, and if you're not cheating, you're not trying, is to set the blades to 0 pitch and set the shafts to maximum RPM. And then when the go signal is broadcast across bridge-to-bridge radio, which has never happened in the history of the United States Navy, then yeah, the blades get set to maximum forward pitch with the shafts already at maximum rotational velocity. This is generally a frowned-upon thing for a variety of reasons. Most significantly, when you shift those blades to maximum pitch, they do something called cavitation, and this is a unique feature for your waters in your oceans. If you expose your water to sufficient force, your water actually makes air bubbles inside of it, just out of the fucking blue. It's wild! But the problem is the creation of those air bubbles and their eventual collapse is typically right on the trailing edge of the blades of the propeller of the ship, the screw of the ship. And that causes massive damage to the propeller of the ship. It just pits the ever-loving hell out of the metal there. Also, you are suddenly exposing the shafts of the ship to massive amounts of torque because they were just cheerfully spinning at maximum RPM with 0 drag there just a second ago, and all of a sudden now you're expecting them to go maximum RPM and all the drag. Yeah, that's a different problem. The fun part of this, that has never happened because these races never happen, is as soon as the DDGs, destroyers, engage full pitch on their props, they make the biggest rooster tail ever. It's kind of like your jet skis, only so much more. There's just water shooting up out of the water and making this beautiful foaming arc behind the destroyer as it totally doesn't do this race that has never happened in the history of the United States Navy. And if anyone ever says it has, they are lying, I am sure. Also, on a related note to things that never happened, I love how your Hollywood believes that these are the kind of binoculars that your bridge lookouts use on your warships. It's absolutely fucking adorable. What's that? They've got bearing and range and elevation and time and maybe the ship's speed? Yeah, none of that shit happens. Now, don't misunderstand me. Every one of your warships has at the absolute bare minimum a port side bridge lookout, a starboard side bridge lookout, and a stern lookout. And all they are doing all the time is sweeping the horizon with their binoculars. But their binoculars are just binoculars. They don't have any electronics in them. They are purely mechanical devices consisting of various lenses and an adjustment system, and that's about it. There's nothing else. They don't get whiz-bang cool toys because, honestly, a lot of binoculars get lost or dropped over the side, or other various bad things happen, and the Navy is simply tired of paying for new ones. So, yeah, you get the basic Mark 1 Mod 0 binocular. Congratulations! Also, relatedly, no bearings are ever provided by lookouts as being true. And this is a weird detail that no one will ever care about, but while we're here, I'm just going to talk about it. Bearing is just another way of saying what direction it is on the 360-degree compass around a ship. So, If I were to say that its bearing were 000, it was directly ahead of the ship. And if I were to say it's 180, it's directly behind the ship. But those bearings are relative. They have absolutely nothing to do with compass bearings. And compass bearings are what are known as true bearings. But lookouts don't know or care about true bearings. They aren't relevant. In fact, to the entire bridge crew, true bearings are largely not relevant to begin with. You are just worried about where things are in relation to the ship, whether it is to your left or to your right. And that is why relative bearings are pretty much the name of the game. They say it is at 090 relative, fine, it is directly off the starboard side of the ship. If they say it's at 090 true, what direction is that? I don't know. Which way is north? Aside from that, though, the lookout's call out was not, entirely wrong, aside from that massive, huge error, but sure, let's spot them that. Now, what's funny is that these Navy vessels' attempts to communicate with the alien ship sticking out of the ocean is not entirely wrong. Basically, they are calling out over bridge-to-bridge radio, which is a very high-frequency radio that you humies use for basically line-of-sight communication. It operates on channels, and you have some designated channels for normal communication. I think 12 is one of the big ones. But the point is, they are calling out on one of the big channels saying that, hey, unidentified vessel at location X by location Y using your longitudinal latitudinal systems, could you give me a call back on this other channel so we can clear this channel and have a conversation about who the hell you are? That's actually a pretty common detail. It's actually really common when ships don't answer to normal hails. And yes, these are called hails. Star Trek got something right. Congratulations, Star Trek. Now, where this movie predictably fucks everything up all over again is this entire notion of Samson, Charlie, Oscar. That's not a thing. There are no Charlie Oscars. I mean, yes, there are CEOs, and that's what that phrase means. But no, when you are calling over bridge to bridge and you are the captain of a ship, you say this is Samson Actual. That is literally how you say it. I'm pretty sure the Halo universe does a pretty good job of this, and I'm also pretty sure Battlestar Galactica does it right too, if I remember properly. But no, there is no, this is Samson Charlie Oscar, and this is John Paul Jones Charlie Oscar. No! This is John Paul Jones Actual. That's how you say it. Say it right! And speaking of saying things right, just for your own edification, this small boat right here on screen right now is otherwise called a RIB, a rigid hull inflatable boat. Yes, that sounds like a contradiction in terms, doesn't it? Basically, it is a fiberglass hull at the core with this big old rubber donut all the way around it so it can bounce up against things and not scratch them too hard. Also, it probably helps with, that whole flotation problem. These are typically sent out with a crew of 4 as opposed to the 3 that you're seeing right now, and yes, they do typically go out with a junior officer on board simply because the Navy simply cannot allow anything to go anywhere without an officer on it. Additionally, they have the coxswain, it's not spelled that way, who drives the ship, an engineer who, takes care of the engines if something were to go wrong, and then yes, someone like a lookout or a gunner or something like that up in the front. The M134 mount is kind of interesting and new, though RIBs don't typically mount those, but I guess it makes for good movies, right? Because who the hell doesn't love a minigun? Well, technically the guys who have to maintain and clean them don't love them, but that's not our problem, is it? So whatever. Now, can we take a moment and talk about the absolute ridiculousness of a spaceship floating in the ocean with a static electrical charge on its hull? It's floating in the ocean. You know how you sometimes hear people talking about grounding out electronics? Yeah, the ocean is a massive fucking ground, which actually sounds funny when I say it that way. So, yeah, there wouldn't be any charge on the skin, much less enough charge to knock a human being like 50 feet. Also, enough charge to knock a human being like 50 feet will probably kill them in the process. Now, maybe it's not actually electricity, but the problem for movies, and the problem producers don't frequently understand, is that if it looks like something you understand, it is going to be that kind of thing that you understand. That's why the splitting turbines on the next generation X-Wings and the sequel trilogy for Star Wars are such a problem for so many sophonts, including me. It looks like a turbine, it even has blades like a turbine, and then you split it in half. The fuck, man? Same problem here. It looks like electricity, it launches a human being like electricity, so it's probably electricity, except it's literally floating in the ocean. And then why on earth, literally in this case, does the Hume touching the ship turn everything on? Is there some kind of unspoken agreement with these aliens that we're not going to do anything until you poke us? Were they not scanning above the surface or even below the surface since ships go through the water, and noticing that these large metal objects were approaching them and then this little tiny object with 3 little people on board it? I mean, what rationale is this the trigger mechanism for the entire ongoing combat, which is about to erupt? I do, however, have to admit that the dome system that the aliens deploy is an interesting and slick way of creating the game board that the two-dimensional game transpires on. And in fairness, it does seem to make a certain degree of sense since these aliens do seem to operate on some sort of challenge-response structured combat. You'll see in a few minutes that they simply respond to what the humans do as opposed to initiating the violence themselves. It's just that they can respond with a lot more force than the humans normally can. So yeah, the dome is actually kind of like the jousting lists from your ancient history, where combatants agree that we're going to fight here and only here, and people can watch, but they're not allowed to get involved. Also, just for the record, I would like to acknowledge the sneaky joke that someone snuck into this particular scene right here. That poor little F-18 that's about to turn into a splat against the dome that the aliens created. Its call sign was Rough Rider 404. Wow, that is such a Hume dad joke. Ouch. And then after that, we get another instance where they get so close to being right, you have to wonder why they got so many other things wrong. The Admiral sets his little fleet at Weapons Posture 1, Warning Level Red, and Weapons Tight. Those are all basically correct phrasings. The Navy has 3 different weapons posture. 3 is basically everything has been unloaded, disassembled, and all the keys have been taken out, everything's turned off, and you're basically not going to be able to do anything if you get shot at. Weapons Posture 2 means you're kind of at like a ready status where the ammunition might be in a ready storage locker and you might have systems that are coming online or able to come online very quickly. And this is kind of how ships normally steam around the ocean. It's kind of like just general purpose yellow alert. Weapons Posture 1 is the keys are in, the keys are turned, everything is loaded, and everybody's ready to go. It's go time, boys and girls. Likewise, the force warning levels also come in 3 levels. You have white, which means attack is not probable. You have yellow, which says attack is probable. And then you have red that says attack is either immediate or already happening. Now, whether or not you count a shield bubble being deployed and your aircraft running into it as an attack, well, apparently this guy did, so he's in charge. His decision. And finally, predictably, weapon control statuses also come in 3 levels. There's Weapons Hold, which is the most restrictive status that simply says you cannot shoot unless you have been fired upon. There is Weapons Tight, which basically says you can shoot anything that has been positively identified as an enemy and only things that are positively identified as an enemy. Weapons Free is literally shoot anything that is not positively identified as being friendly. So yeah, that can get real fun real fast. And now, finally, we get a clear shot at the actual combat vessels who were landed by the aliens. In fact, they're all conveniently coded red, green, and blue for easy identification. And naturally, this just gets weirder and weirder. Apparently, the ships are generically polymorphic. They have all of these massive moving segments and parts all over them, which must really complicate re-entry for them. Likewise, why are they in the ocean? I mean, they're resting on top of the water almost like it's solid. So they obviously have anti-gravitic systems of some sort. Why not just fly around? Why are they confining themselves to just like tap dancing on top of the water like some sort of overgrown mechanical water strider of some sort? Is this another aspect of their whole like structured archetypical combat method where they landed in the ocean and these boats came and visited them, so they're going to pretend they're boats too just to make it a level playing field or whatever? It makes no sense otherwise, and even that doesn't make a great deal of sense. Also, there is no way in hell, on God's green earth, or anywhere else, that those DDGs would have basically stopped. I mean, they're making a tiny bit of headway, but no. That never would have happened. DDGs especially are always moving, because it takes time to get moving once you stop. And movement is maneuverability, and maneuverability is life, even though that's not necessarily true these days for your current technology. But still, maneuverability is key in almost every kind of combat environment, and stopping robs you of all that maneuverability. So, and even beyond the whole combat aspect of it, stopping a ship in the ocean is a recipe for a really unpleasant ride. Most of the time when ships are moving, they're cutting through the waves or with the waves or crosswise the waves or whatever. They're moving through the water, so you get the nice swelling motion on average. On a rough days, it gets a lot more exciting. But if you just stop, then the waves get to have their way with you. And, well, as we've always pointed out, water always wins. Especially when that water, in this particular case, is literally liquid condensed hate. But, I mean, seriously, look at that. Why is it doodling about on top of the ocean? What purpose does that serve it? It's about to launch itself flying after people start shooting at it and then land somewhere else in the ocean. Why does it keep landing? There's nothing to land on. It's water. And here we have yet another instance of the movie getting everything wrong, and it would not have taken them much effort to get it right. The use of horns on the ocean, and in fact the size and strength and frequency of the horns used on the ocean, are actually dictated by one of your very many regulations called the International Regulations for Preventing Collisions at Sea from 1972. Bizarrely, that mouthful of words compresses itself down to colregs. I have no idea why. Anyways, the colregs give you instructions on how to use your horns at sea. In fact, they're basically the entire premise of the international oceanic rules of the road notion. I'm sure your roadways also have rules of the road. Think about rules of the road for a system that basically doesn't have roads except at certain points, and we're not going to talk about that right now. Anyways, horns. 1 short blast means you're turning starboard. 2 short blasts means you're turning, hey, guess what? Port. 3 short blasts means you're backing up, and then if you have no idea what the other guy is doing and you want to warn him about that, like the CO directed his helmsman to warn the aliens of whatever, I don't know, you do 5 short blasts. 1 long blast is actually for a powered vehicle making way in restricted visibility. It's basically a way of saying, a ship saying that, hey, I'm here and listen to me. And honestly, out in the ocean, you can locate a sound pretty easily because you're not getting a lot of reflections from, the flat surface around you. So you can hear other ships in fog or other limited visibility conditions. But yeah, that's saying I'm making way and look out for me. They weren't really making way. This isn't restricted visibility. So 5 short blasts, you fuckers. And of course, the aliens, mistake this warning blast as a failed attempt at an acoustic weapon and therefore deploy a actually effective acoustic weapon of their own, and things start going to shit. But on the way to maximum excrement settings, I just love, again, how they get some things right and so many other things wrong. So the lead ship of this group of 3 DDGs took some damage when that acoustic weapon went off, and their main 5-inch gun got disabled, and at this point radio communications, in addition to radar itself, which we will come back to, is currently jacked on account of the energy dome that the aliens dropped over the Hawaii waterfront area. Fine. Yes, your US Navy does actually know how to communicate when they don't have radios. They do it through blinking lights. I'm not even joking. This has been around for basically as long as you humans could blink lights. It uses Morse code, and it has this big old spotlight with this shutter mechanism on it. And you flash the light, and you tell the other ship what to do. Now, of course, you're not saying explicitly, hey, other ship by other ship's name, I really want you to shoot that target using this gun, blah, 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 so on and so forth. No, there's brevity codes and all kinds of other interesting things. But still, the fact that the producers knew that you could do blinky lights, and they f***ed up so much else, come on, guys, you're killing me! Although this is actually kind of the lead-in for a chain of things they got right. The John Paul Jones activated Mount 5-1, which in fact is their main 5-inch gun, their only 5-inch gun technically, since these are destroyers, not cruisers, and put it in remote, which basically means that it is being controlled from the Combat Information Center in the superstructure of the ship, as opposed to the gun room immediately underneath the turret itself. It can actually be controlled locally. The only thing wrong in this particular scene is that the gunner's mates were still shown loading 5-inch rounds into the ready magazine for the 5-inch gun, which would have already happened when we went to weapons condition 1. Also, incidentally, they actually showed correctly how the 5-inch gun that the Navy uses presently is loaded. It is actually not a unitary round. The last unitary round your United States Navy used for main guns was in the 3-inch system that was on your old FFGs that have all been retired now. And by unitary, I mean that the projectile and the case holding the propellant are all one single piece. They look like what you humies think of as bullets, but are actually cartridges. For the 5-inch gun, you actually have a separate projectile and a separate canister holding the powder load for the projectile, and they are assembled into the gun, basically, kind of like your old Battleship used to, only without bags. They actually use cartridge cases for the powder in that particular case. Also, notably, the projectiles are loaded manually, and they weigh about 32 kilograms, which is, not insignificant. And by that I mean they're loaded into the ready magazine, and after that it all gets kind of automatic, but still there's a human involved at some point in the process. Anyways, the aliens correctly identified the quote-unquote warning shot as an attempted shot that just missed, and responded appropriately, which brings us to the next fun part. Yep, the pegs. You see, those aren't actually guns, those are the pegs from the game. Now what's funny is you're showing the pegs right after the alien battleship hops out of the water, goes flying over the rib, and lands back in the water again. Because, moving your ship around is actually part of Battleship. Wait, no it's not. And then, once it gets there, it deploys these dorsally mounted mortars, for lack of a better word. Why the f*** does a spaceship have mortars? I mean, the physics are radically different once you're inside of a gravity well. If you shoot these things out in space, they'll travel directly. If you shoot them in a gravity well, they'll travel on a nice parabolic arc. You have to be able to do the math both ways, and why make a system that works both ways? Why not do something a little faster or use an energy beam? Well, because it's Battleship and we're doing pegs. And then, since these are coming in on a nice parabolic path, and they are actually projectiles headed towards a U.S. Navy vessel at weapons condition 1 and weapons tight and warning level red, Seawiz gets to play, otherwise known as R2-D2 with a heart on. And once again, they get it so close to right that it's just infuriating that they get it wrong at the same time. Yes, Seawiz is actually the solution for this particular problem on a lot of Navy's warships at this point. The concept of a close-in weapon system. The United States Navy system specifically is called Phalanx, and its primary weapon is that massive 6-barrel 20mm cannon at the center of it. At the time, they were probably slinging depleted uranium rounds, although apparently your United States Navy has decided that is unhealthy for you squishies, and they have since transitioned to tungsten. Additionally, this is the Block 1, I believe, model, and the Block 1B model adds a infrared camera to the side of the R2-D2 section, so you can actually sit there with the joystick and drive the thing around and actually engage surface targets, which is kind of a neat feature. The real problem with this scene is, how did Seawiz see the targets? Actually, how did the guys down in CIC see the target? Because they made a big deal just a bit ago about how all of their surface search radars were completely f***ed by the bubble. And frankly, if surface search is f***ed, so is air search. Mostly because on DDGs, they basically both use the same radar system. They both rely on the Spy 1 phased array radar system. But anyways, first off, the US ships are way too close to the alien ships. They should be at standoff range, not, reach out and touch them range. Secondly, if radars are f***ed, there's absolutely f*** all that Seawiz can do. You see, Seawiz is entirely radar-driven, and when the CIC guys called out the vampire, which was the correct call to make, they can turn on Seawiz and it can start doing its thing. And Seawiz itself has 2 radar systems inside of it. It is a broad sweep system that is good out to a certain-ish range, and then it has a very narrow, very precise, very bang-on-that-wall radar system that is basically its targeting radar system. That takes over at about 8 kilometers, and then it can decide whether or not to engage by the time the target gets to about 2 kilometers. And actually, depending on the setting of the Seawiz system, it can make that decision by itself. Normally, there's a human involved in the loop for final confirmation of, yay, verily, this is a good target, but Seawiz can do the math and say, okay, that's a bird, not a plane. Or maybe it's Superman, who knows? And that second radar system, the targeting radar system, is so very precise that it actually tracks the bullets of the Seawiz system and guides the gun in on the target based off of how much it's missing or hitting. It is that good of a radar system. Well, normally it is. Normally when it's not being jammed, and normally when it's not dealing with alien ships that apparently have radar-absorbing technology on them. And if the ships have radar-absorbing technology on them, why don't the weapons? I mean, it's possible that the weapons don't, in which case, yes, Seawiz would be able to pick them out and shoot them down, assuming it wasn't already being jammed. Make up your minds, writers. But yes, anyways, Seawiz, totally awesome, totally terrifying. Yes, it does put up a literal wall of bullets. It can shoot down a lot of things, and it is so very loud, especially inside of the skin of the ship. It sounds like there's just so fast vibration coming from every bulkhead, or at least so I'm told. Now, what's funny about these stupid pegs is they appear to have multiple modes of operation. When they hit a ship, they hit invariably narrow side down because, pegs, and then auger into the ship and then detonate. On the other hand, if they miss the ship entirely, as they are about to do in this particular case, and flop into the water, they can also be activated as depth charges. I don't know if that's an automatic feature of theirs or if whatever gunner on the alien battleship is pushing a button making them detonate, but it seems like a weird contradiction of things. I mean, I guess the auguring into the enemy ship is actually meant to help increase the problem of the explosion that's about to go off. Think of it as like armor piercing by brute force. But yeah, weird mix of functionality there. And I gotta admit, whatever explosive charge those pegs pack is pretty interesting, because in this particular scene, everybody gets thrown down the corridor first time, and then sucked backwards, and then thrown down again. It's almost like it's a two-stage charge, or maybe something thermobaric, possibly. Still, big boom. But now, unfortunately, we get to the primary shortcoming of any Seawiz system, and that is ammunition. Or saturation, depending on how you want to look at it. The point is, the Block 1 Seawiz for your United States Navy can fire at a rate of about 4,500 rounds per minute. That's a lot. Its magazine that it has mounted underneath the gun only has about 1,500 rounds in it, which, if you can do the math, means it's only good for about 20 seconds of engagement. This Seawiz has been engaging a lot recently and ran dry. And even if it didn't run dry, the enemy just popped out a butt-ton of pegs, which would have oversaturated the Seawiz anyways. And this is why you do not fight the ship this close to the goddamn enemy. Because yes, destroyers do actually have two Seawiz mounts, one forward, one aft. Problem is, they are literally pointing their nose directly at the enemy, so only the forward Seawiz mount can engage. The aft Seawiz mount is like, what the f***'s going on, man? I want to play too. And if they were actually fighting their ship like they're supposed to be fighting their ship, they'd be at 10, 15 nautical miles away and be able to maneuver the ship so that they could open up the aft Seawiz mount and engage the new targets and give them time to reload the forward Seawiz mount. But they didn't. Also, brief continuity error here. This particular ship just got pegged to hell by one of the, pegs. And it was just to the left of the forward 5-inch mount. I don't notice a massive hole in this particular frame, do you? And speaking of getting pegged... Wait, what? You're trying to tell me it means what? What? They do that? Oh. Well, I don't know what else to call this. Anyway, speaking of getting pegged, so this is a recipe for a bad day. And it turned out to be a recipe for a bad day. Yeah, so basically the days of U.S. Navy warships having inch-thick plate metal arming is long since gone. The skins of the ship are maybe at most a centimeter thick, if even that, and that's probably only on like the deepest part of the hull where it has to be the strongest. Yeah, no, this stuff is like tissue paper, and yes, this randomly launched peg will totally penetrate. Yes, it'll do that. But this is another instance of how the art department and or writers and or whomever else simply do not understand physics. These pegs are launched mortar-wise from a ship that is approximately about, 30, 40 degrees to the left of the destroyer currently getting pegged. I swear to God. Anyways, there is no conceivable way that every single one of these little canisters would be able to hit the destroyer at the exact same angle, all in a cute little line. Some of them would have to bounce off, unless the aliens have some really complicated launching system that specifically imparts a absolutely exacting spin on every single peg, and it all works out in the end, which doesn't make any sense at all. And unfortunately, of course, ship go boom. This is actually not that bad of a representation of how a destroyer might possibly go boom. There was already a massive boom, which again, continuity error is not showing up because it was basically blew off the bow of the ship because that's where the vertical launch systems are. And yeah, those rocket motors would totally blow off the bow of the ship if a big enough explosion were to set them off inside the magazine. So yeah, this actually, good job, art department, in this one particular case. That you could have done anything else right? And speaking of getting things, occasionally right, this is basically how the hierarchy of a U.S. Navy warship works. If the captain is incapacitated, the XO takes over, and if the executive officer is incapacitated, then the senior-most officer after him takes over. And those are typically either the ops officer, operations officer, or the weapons officer, the weapons officer. In this case, it's the weapons officer. And seniority is a little complicated. Typically, you can figure it out by rank, but the person who's held the rank longer is more senior than the one who hasn't, obviously. And then since, like we mentioned previously, this guy's a Mustang, it's even more complicated than that, simply because he has more time in service total. It's mostly just a pissing match, but in the moment, yeah, it's your ship, man. Good job. And I actually adore the reaction of the ginger behind the wheel right now because, yeah, another U.S. Navy warship just blew the f*** up. He has no idea what the hell he's supposed to be doing right now. Give him an order. And that is simply a failing of your Humy squishy minds. I mean, the U.S. Navy, of course, trains people over and over and over again about how to deal with combat, but actually dealing with combat firsthand, right then and there, watching a ship full of people you know explode, yeah, that's going to be a gut check moment. And it is incumbent upon officers specifically and senior enlisted personnel to be that rock in the waves and be able to direct the people around them and be able to project that calm, get shit done attitude. But as is often the case, what the officer wants to do is not always the best idea. And here we have a classic shot of a senior enlisted personnel going, oh, f***. Because, yeah, of course, the Weps just ordered a suicidal attack on the alien ships that just destroyed their other destroyer. So, I mean, yeah, I'd be having the same reaction my own self. However, immediately, the chief turns around and says, fine, we're doing it. He backs up his officer. Because, well, right now is not actually the time to be having that conversation. We can have that conversation if we survive, I suppose. Oh, right, and since I haven't mentioned it previously, I would just like to point out the hoods that the sailors, except for the officer and senior enlisted officer who came off of the rib, are wearing around their necks. Those are called flash hoods. Technically, they should be wearing them over their heads, because that's what you do at general quarters, but I imagine Hollywood decided that made for bad cinema. But yes, these are basically meant to be anti-fire flash protection for your squishy little human heads. They are nominally fire resistant for a brief amount of time, but they're meant to more protect you against the sudden flash of an explosion or a sudden fire, and allow you the chance to get out of the situation without, your hair catching on fire and your brain melting. It's the little things that matter. And while, unfortunately, the U.S. Navy Seawiz system has a very long reload time, it appears the aliens' little peg mortar system does not. And they were able to take out the second of the 3 destroyers that they captured inside of the bubble. And here we have a classic shot of what happens when the explosion is big enough that it completely destroys the magazines that the VLS system lives in and the magazine for the 5-inch guns that are now currently loaded and ready to shoot. Because, yeah, I mean, the pegs have a pretty good big boom on their own, but once you throw in all of the rounds in the 5-inch magazine, all of the standard missiles and their motors that were in their magazine, and everything else, yeah, you're going to break the ship. Now, no, normally this is not the case. All of those weapons and all their ammunition are in armored, contained, protected magazines. And the magazines are deliberately designed to not only contain any fire or explosion that goes off in them, but put it out at the same time. The problem is the peg hit at just the right spot between the 5-inch gun and the VLS system, that is a vertical launch system, that, yeah, the explosion was good enough that it broke everything all at once. And even the automated systems couldn't handle what just happened, mostly because they were destroyed. This is, honestly, a thing that Navy ships have to deal with the possibility of it happening. Because, yeah, if a harpoon or a sunburn or an equivalent hits at just the right spot, you probably have a really good or bad, depending on how you want to look at it, chance of a catastrophic cascade failure. There's not much damage control can do in this particular case. This particular explosion literally cracked the keel of the ship, snapped it in two. So at this point, you abandon ship and you move on, hopefully, with your lives. If it were just the 5-inch magazine or just the standard missile magazines or some limited number of them, it would probably survive. In fact, the VLS system is actually also designed to vent the explosions upward if they get bad enough. The top literally pops off. But again, when the failure is so catastrophic, what are you going to do? And okay, I kind of lied. Because now is the right time for the senior enlisted person to have that conversation with the officer who is making some, let's go with interesting decisions. And to back up just a moment, I absolutely adore your navies, all of your navies in fact, and specifically all of your sailors. Because if there's one thing that none of your sailors will ever do, it is abandon someone in the ocean. It simply just does not occur to them, matter to them, anything. You could have literally put that person into the water yourself. You could have destroyed their ship, destroyed everything they ever knew. And if they're in the ocean flailing about, 90+% of your sailors, even if they were the person who put them in the water, would fish them out of the water again. And that is just fascinating. It's a testament to how much the ocean is liquid hate, but it is also fascinating. It's a fascinating insight into the mentality of you squishies. You value each other's lives so much that even if you were literally shooting at the person 5 minutes ago, you will rescue them from the ocean. Think about that for just a second. I mean, seriously, just think about it. Your combat medics. Your combat medics are also amazing people, but they are a specific class of your ground warfare cadre. Your sailors, on the other hand, do that for everyone, and they're all combat types. I mean, yes, ships have medics on board and doctors on board frequently. But if someone's in the ocean in distress, yeah, most of your sailors will fish them out. You have to comprehend how notable that is, how, well, fundamentally human that is. So, yes, to his credit, or perhaps discredit, the chief in question in this scene is attempting to appeal to the officer who is making some very poor decisions and using people in the water as an excuse to not go down a decision path that will result in their death. Yes, and that decision path is basically attacking the alien warship. And the helmsman, the ginger we talked about previously, the one who has the beautiful reaction of, I don't know what to do, yeah, he's also unintentionally appealing to his officer, pointing out that the aliens have not shot anything that did not shoot them first. Now again, this probably falls back to the aliens' concept of honorable combat, but still, the truth remains that they haven't shot anything that didn't shoot them first. So why you want to shoot them first? You're gonna get f***ed. So yeah, there was this interesting pincher movement going on with this dumbass officer in question. On the one hand, we have the very junior enlisted person and reminding the officer that the only people who got shot did the shooting first. So maybe we shouldn't, shoot. And then we have the more senior enlisted personnel reminding the officer that, hey, there are men in the water. And it's your goddamn job to rescue those men in the water. And yes, you need to fight the ship. But if fighting the ship means the ship gets destroyed, maybe you should rescue the men in the water instead. Just an idea. Now, what's interesting is that the aliens acknowledged this abandonment of hostilities as what it was, and they themselves turned off their own weapon systems, themselves, which kind of makes you wonder what the hell they're doing here to begin with. Is this just artful combat for the sake of artful combat, or is there something more going on here? Is this like robot jocks, or is this like, robot jocks? I don't know. It's unclear, and I'm not sure the movie ever actually clarifies that. Well, aliens, there's a fun hypothesis about how you squishies will never understand aliens' motivations simply because they are alien. They are not only alien to you, fundamentally, they come from another planet, but their motivations come from another planet. How do you understand the motivation that came from another planet? I mean, technically you can't. So that's fun. Now, on the flip side, while the alien warships may be satisfied that your Hume warships are, taking a break at the moment, mostly because 2 of them are destroyed, the command and control vessel was not so convinced. And so begins the deployment of the buzzsaws, blenders, massive problems for you squishy humans. It's really hard to say what to call these things. I legitimately do not even know how to categorize these things. These things are what happens if you up-armor a hamster to the massive extreme and then feed it all the crack on your planet and tell it that the cheese is at the end of the time it spins. And it's going to spin forever because you just fed it all the crack. And, it got kind of angry about that particular contract, which makes it bounce all over the place and eat everything. And why? Why is this a weapon system? I mean, it actually makes a certain degree of sense. As long as it's, cybernetic, which is highly probable given this case, and as long as it's targetable, and as long as it keeps spinning, then yeah, it's going to eat everything you squishies have available to you, because almost nothing you squishies have are armored, especially nothing you have that goes out on the sea. So yeah, the massive flying blenders, actually a pretty good idea. I should take a note of that. Now, of course, what's interesting is, yes, the flying bowling ball blenders of doom are in fact controllable. In fact, they have their own onboard targeting systems, and they are able to identify that your smaller squishies, otherwise known as children, are not viable combat targets. In fact, they preferentially choose the intersection of your interstates as a combat target because, logistics. Your amateurs talk about tactics, your experts talk about logistics. And yeah, they know the difference, and they know that some entities are not playing the current combat game that they're playing. There is a lot of structured warfare going on here, isn't there? And speaking of structures and such like, we're back to the aliens going back to the actual origination of the signal, which they would not know. The signal originated for them from the satellite that repeated the signal from your planet. As soon as you shift where the origination point goes, you can't trace back to the actual origination point unless you have really interesting technology, which they might have. But the point is, when the satellite picked up the signal from Earth and bounced it off into space, that was the origination point. They did not take their time and stop and study the satellite as it went by, so they had no idea where that signal actually came from. So I have no idea why they are investigating the 3 satellite dishes on the main island of Hawaii, aside from, plot. And on a perfectly sociological point, I can't help but to appreciate Chief Lynch's nut up or shut up speech, as brief as it was. Because yeah, congratulations, Weps. You're captain. You did not see this coming. You did not want this coming. You did not expect this coming. Last thing you heard, you were going to be summarily drummed out of the Navy for various and sundry reasons that probably would violate the UCMJ. But right now, we're in a fucking knockdown, drag-out fight. So dig yourself the fuck out of whatever fucking hole you're in and unfuck yourself and tell us what the fuck to do. Because, yeah, that's the kind of motivation that senior enlisted personnel give to officers. It is totally a give and take relationship, and it is functionally amazing. But, on the flip side, if you are the technologically inferior force, don't take prisoners of war. Yes, I fully understand that you Humies love taking you some prisoners whenever you get the opportunity, but the problem is, if you are the technologically inferior force, then the technologically superior force has a vested interest in you not taking prisoners. Otherwise, you might reverse engineer their, technology, and that would annoy them. So, taking prisoners of war is definitely going to annoy them. So, don't do that. Unless, of course, you can defend yourself from what is coming, and, well, this ship can't. Because, yeah, what happens when a technologically inferior force manages to capture what amounts to be an engineer from the technologically superior force, then the technologically superior force shows up in full-on combat armor and literally blows a hole in your ship to recover the asset that they lost. Net loss technologically inferior group? Because, yeah, once you open that door, they're going to be a lot more flexible about where they send their people and what those people are doing in their very tremendously advanced combat suits. So, yeah, buckle up, guys. Also, by the way, the gas turbines that provide their propulsion to the screws on the stern of the ship are not just hanging around in any random engineering space. They are in their own confined boxes, partially because they are noisy as fuck. Secondarily, because it's an easy way of routing air into and out of them. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, it's an easy way of controlling a fire if they were ever to catch fire. Also, by the way, if someone is in power suit armor, don't try to combat them if you're not in a power suit armor. It will end poorly for you. Seriously though, guys, your United States Navy makes some pretty solid hardware. And any power armor that can just, literally beat through a watertight door, dogs and all, you don't want none of that. And speaking of the ridiculousness of power armor and the weakness of your frail human forms, there is no conceivable way that the weapons officer, now commanding officer of this ship, would have survived this situation because, yes, the muzzle blast from the 5-inch guns is ridiculous. Every squishy little organ that he had in his little squishy body would have literally liquefied as soon as that 5-inch gun went off. It wouldn't matter if he was holding on to the railings of the ship or not. He'd have been dead. So, yeah. Yay, Hollywood writers. And then we have Derpy McDerperson Mark II over here trying to claim that 3-4 invading alien ships are an extinction level event. Extinction level events are when, like, a moon-sized asteroid decides to whack into your planet. I mean, that's actually happened a few times on your planet. And yeah, that tends to lead to extinction. You don't know anything about these guys except that they've firmly established a beachhead on your planet and lack the means to communicate back to their own homeworld, which they are working on acquiring. But still, you're not quite there yet. It might be coming, but you ain't there yet. Now, yes, acknowledging that the aliens are attempting to establish communication with their homeworld, what they could bring afterwards could probably be an extinction-level event. But yeah, they accidentally crashed their communication ship into one of your satellites, so they're not actually that durable. I mean, I'm not even sure the 5-inch guns from the destroyers landed any but one hit. And it did damage to the ship that it hit, but still, they missed an awful lot. The funny thing is that the movie's representation of your human reaction to the knowledge that you are not alone in the universe, and very much not alone by way of the universe coming and landing on your back doorstep, is not entirely inaccurate. Your species is remarkably prone to flights of insanity and mob hysteria and stuff like that. And yeah, being faced with that cold, hard reality by way of an actual cold, hard ship, yeah, it would break a lot of you, and then you get stuff like pillaging and looting and burning and rioting and all kinds of other unpleasantness that your species is known for. But in another case of getting it so close and still getting it so very wrong, although this wrongness is explainable, yes, your Hawaiian Islands and a lot of your west coast of your North American continent do actually have tsunami buoys around them because tsunamis are kind of a bad deal. And the funny thing about waves is you can think of them as kind of like a cyclic rolling through the water. And in deep water, you can barely notice them go by. But when that cyclic gets up onto the shelf and onto the shore, suddenly a 5-inch swell becomes a 50-foot wave. I'm not sure that numbers are quite right, but still the premise is basically that. And what these tsunami buoys are looking for is a consistent swell that passes by them. They're tethered to the bottom of the ocean, and they do complicated math on how that tether stretches. In fact, at this point in their life, they're probably fully upgraded to 3-dimensional GPS and so on and so forth. So yes, if a ship provided sufficient displacement, you could totally track their movement. The thing is, there aren't that many buoys, and notably, they're not in a grid. Now, as I said, that part of getting it wrong is explainable because, after all, we're playing Battleship, and it has to be on a grid, because the Humies have decided that since they can't target the alien ships, they need to target where they think the alien ships are based off of, well, displacement. Okay, yep, we're playing Battleship again. The other thing that they mostly get wrong is that in your oceans, particularly, displacement isn't like in a bathtub, obviously. If you were to fill up one of your bathing vessel things with water and insert yourself into it, obviously the water level inside the tub would appear to rise. I think one of your very old Greeks or something discovered that particular idea a long time ago. It doesn't really apply to oceans. They're big. Your ships are small. You're not going to make that big of a long-term difference to the displacement of the water. Now, as the ship moves by, then yes, there will be a wave coming off the bow of the ship that maybe these buoys could detect if they were close enough. And in the aliens' case, they're probably not paying attention to the buoys, so they might be landing right on top of them. So yes, the buoys would get that momentary spike of, whoa, something just changed. But then the massive system that is your ocean would allow the water to settle back out again, and there would be functionally no difference. So yeah, you might get an alert, but you're not going to get a long-term fix. Now, what's funny is that, naturally, the aliens are somewhat intrigued by technology they apparently do not have themselves, much like you humies are intrigued by any shiny rock you come across. Because apparently these aliens don't have problems with their eyesight like you do, and one of their engineers was utterly fascinated with the glasses that one of the humies in the movie was wearing. Yeah, think about that for just a second. Think how funny it is for someone to be distracted by something as simple for you as eyeglasses. Totally happens all the time, though, especially when advanced species are meeting really not advanced species, or vice versa. Everyone gets distracted by everyone's shiny toys. But speaking of getting shiny toys wrong, remember how I talked about DDG races and variable pitch propellers and this, that, and the other? Yeah, they don't look like that. That's a classic steamship propeller, and like I said, for the variable pitch blades, you don't actually have to stop the propeller and spin it the other way. You just feather the blades the other direction. I suppose that doesn't look as good on camera, though, or Hollywood simply didn't even know that existed. Both of those seem likely, actually. And now, finally, we get to see just how weak these alien ships are. After all, one was taken out by a satellite. And yeah, 2 harpoons, that's pretty much day-ruining for even your current surface navy ships. Your combatants would have a very hard time recovering from that. Your carriers and larger amphibious could probably limp away, but yeah, combatants are in for a bad time. So again, the aliens aren't actually that strong. Their only problem is you just can't shoot them very easily. So why is everyone terrified of them? You have optically guided munitions, like literally missiles and torpedoes and all those other fun toys that have little teeny cameras in their noses, and you can drive them into the target. Do that! But, of course, the one remaining alien vessel out of the original 3 took the destruction of the other 2 kind of personal-like, and, well, the other advantage the aliens have is that they are much, much faster than your warships. And courtesy of being much, much faster, the alien ships can zig and zag and dodge and come at you erratically, because at least the third one is captained by a somewhat intelligent alien, and realized that driving directly at the Humie warship didn't work out so well for the other 2. So let's try something else. Oh hey, I guess when I was looking for photos of a target's torpedo room, I should have looked at the movie. Yeah, those are the cute little adorable torpedoes that your surface navies use right now, or at least your United States surface navy uses. They're Mark 46s. They were originally designed for dropping from helicopters. They work pretty well on surface ships too. They're loaded into a 3-shot torpedo system that poots them out of the surface ship by way of a pneumatic charge, and then they tootle off and go destroy something, hopefully. They are the very loose, distant cousins of the Mark 48 ad caps, only the ad caps are like 3 times longer, 3 times smarter, and 3 times more powerful. So, yeah, the surface navies don't really use torpedoes unless they absolutely have to. And speaking of interesting tools, it's always intriguing when Hollywood actually shows the M82 being used for what it was technically designated to do, and that is to say anti-materiel purposes, blowing up vehicles, lightly armored vehicles specifically. In fact, your United States Coast Guard uses a similar model of firearm in helicopters to disable what are called go-fasts, otherwise known as fast boats, basically. Your drug runners in your Central and Southern American continents typically run drugs across the ocean by way of these vehicles, and the Coast Guard goes up in helos and shoots out the engines. Quite effective, honestly. An interesting story about that, though, is they logically thought that, these M82s are quite heavy and quite cumbersome and quite long to deal with in a helicopter. So why don't we, make a shorter barrel version that would be easier to maneuver in the cramped confines of a helicopter? Well, the problem is the 50 caliber round and cartridge that the M82 uses is quite powerful, and the muzzle brake that it uses to compensate for that power is quite effective. And apparently, the first time one of those Coast Guard individuals lit off this short barrel 50 caliber rifle inside of a helicopter, it basically blew out all the windows. So now they use the full-size model with the muzzle brake way out there so they don't have to worry about the backblast so much. Funny how physics works. And apparently the anti-material aspect of this particular M82 was used to blow out the windows in the alien spacecraft because the Humies realized that the aliens are quite sensitive to light, and so they wanted to expose the aliens to all the possible light they possibly could. Now, this raises some interesting questions because apparently these aliens came from a planet that your astronomers largely categorize as Earth-like. It's far enough away from the sun that it's not being scoured by the solar rays, but it's close enough that water is still liquid, which still means that it's going to have similar solar properties, not the same necessarily, depending on the certain physics involved. But if the aliens themselves have decided that your planet is suitable for colonization and or harvesting, then there's got to be some similarities. And the sun, you would think, would be about as bright as well, at least during the day. So it seems strange that a species would have evolved on an Earth-type planet without being able to deal with a G-type star. Now, of course, because plot, blinding the bridge crew on the alien ship prevented them from shooting at the Humie ship, which makes almost no sense at all. Even your Humie ships have a difference between the bridge and the Combat Information Center, and the shooting happens in the Combat Information Center. They have cameras, they have, radar, they have call-outs from lookouts, and so on and so forth. Do the aliens not have separate command and control systems? Hard to say. They obviously have very complicated, very powerful ships, but if they're doing their driving and they're shooting from the bridge, well, you have problems like this, where disabling the bridge disables the guns. That seems like a failure. Now, I misspoke earlier. The two missiles that hit the 4 missiles that hit the 2 alien ships previously were not harpoons. They are what are called standard missiles. Yeah, that's a really imaginative name, isn't it? The primary difference is that the harpoons were purpose-built from the ground up to be ship-killing missiles, but they only launch from these angled launchers on the deck of the ship. They don't come out of the VLS system, whereas the standard missiles are vertically launched missiles, but they were originally designed for surface-to-air use. They were later modified to allow them to also engage surface targets, therefore, giving them more flexibility. Either way, it's going to hurt. And in terms of Hollywood occasionally getting things right, yes, that is what a standard missile looks like. However, this is not what a standard missile looks like. But it made a great scene for the poster for the movie, right? And once again, we are shown that the aliens are not actually as powerful as the humans seem to believe. I mean, yes, the humans are absolutely terrified of the aliens because aliens were able to triple-handedly destroy 2 of your DDGs. That's because your DDGs were being fucking idiots. They literally got taken out by oversized mortars. How sad is that? And yeah, any one of your ships being hit by 4 standard missiles, 3 Mark 46s, and a whole pile of other stuff, yeah, that'll pretty much total any of your ships too. So the aliens aren't any more powerful than you guys are. It's just they got the drop on you one time and you guys freaked out, which is also a notable failing of your species as a whole, but at least you finally dug your heads out of your asses in this particular case. Unfortunately, so has the mothership or shield generator ship or whatever the hell the remaining alien ship actually is, and it decided to lob 2 of those spinny balls of death at the remaining destroyer. I literally have no idea how these things work. Apparently they have tails, they spin incessantly. I don't actually know how you would get them spinning that fast for that long, especially after they hit something with solid resistance. Although, like I mentioned previously, your United States Navy ships' skins are pretty thin, so yeah, the fact that it's chewing through them like it would a tin can is, destroyers used to be called tin cans on your planet, for a reason. Anyways, I can only assume that they have some sort of rocket motor or inertialist drive inside of them that it could explain both the glowing coloration and the fact that they just keep spinning so fast, even after they hit the ground. Yeah, it's a fun toy. I'm surprised they don't use them more often, given that they seem to be able to fly independently and just chew the f*** out of things. And yeah, when you have crazy psycho murder balls of f*** your face tearing up your ship, the only rational response is to abandon ship. Interestingly, your United States Navy warships do not actually carry that many life jackets on board. What they do have are those inflatable dinghies that you see out in the water right now. They are contained within these large gray cylinders with these big black rubber bands around the middle of them. And basically, if you push them over the side, they automatically pop open and use a CO2 charge to fill up this massive octagonal floating raft. And that's your life preserver, for lack of a better word. Also, notably, the CO2 charge does go off as soon as the cylinder goes upside down, which makes marking and, obeying the orientation on these things very important. No, they have never randomly gone off on the deck of a warship when someone accidentally let one roll. Why do you ask? Also, yes, as ridiculous as it looks in this particular scene, it would actually be possible to kind of climb your way up the flight deck of a sinking DDG that was going in bow first. And that is courtesy of the texture that you see on the flight deck there that they're crawling up. That is called non-skid. It is a particular type of epoxy paint, I believe, that leaves behind very thick, very deep, very vigorous texture. The kind of texture that will cheerfully remove all of your skin should you ever actually fall on it while you're moving. And, well, in this case, it lets you go up a ramp. Also, going up the stern of a sinking ship that is sinking bow first is like the worst idea ever. Remember that whole displacement thing? As the ship goes in, the water is going to come swirling in behind it and suck you down if you pop off the stern as the ship sinks. You want to get away from a sinking ship as fast as possible. Go off the sides and swim directly away from it. You don't want to get caught in that vortex. And now moving on rapidly, as movies are wont to do, you just absolutely have to love how these hyper-advanced aliens who can do across the galaxy travel and invade this random backwater planet, their technology still boils down to two grunts humping around hoses or conduits or whatever and trying to get the goddamn things coupled. I mean, how cute is that? And as we all saw coming, simply because of the title of the movie, and we've only been dorking around on destroyers so far, yes, we're going to get a battleship involved, and this is where an already redonkulous movie just completely falls apart. So yes, that is in fact the USS Missouri. She is in fact the last battleship ever commissioned by your United States, and probably most notable for being the site of the surrender of the Empire of Japan. She was initially commissioned in 1944 by your calendar, decommissioned in 1955, recommissioned in 1986, decommissioned for the last time in 92, and struck from the records in 95. The struck part is the important part. Because yes, after she was decommissioned in 92, she went to a reserve fleet where she was moderately maintained in the notion that if you might ever need a battleship ever again, it wouldn't take too much effort to get her up and running again. However, once she gets struck from the records, she gets handed over to museum people, and I am not trying to be mean to museum people. They are some of the most fascinating and caring individuals on your little planet. However, they simply do not have the budget or manpower necessary to keep these ships in full operational capacity. After all, they don't have to be. They're museum ships. They spend their entire lives tied up to the side of the shore. So things aren't maintained, and things aren't kept in operational status, and things are left dormant for long enough that they might actually fall apart. In fact, in 2009 by your calendar, the Missouri actually had to be moved into a dry dock to repair her hull that apparently was leaking in multiple places. This is what happens when you leave a ship sitting in a saltwater environment and don't have the manpower or budget to adequately maintain her. And that's just the hull. You've also got all the gear and equipment and everything else in there that needs preventative maintenance. It needs oiling. It needs operating. Otherwise, it won't operate. It will seize up. It will rust in place. And again, it's not the museum curator's fault. They simply don't have the capacities to keep the ship running, which is why the Battleship movie gets so ridiculous from this point on. And yes, those badass Persian Gulf and Korean War and whatever the hell else other war vets who had served on the Missouri would be a massive boon to the destroyer captain trying to get this thing running. However, you can't just turn a key on a boiler. Even if the boiler was like fresh off of the assembly line, good to go from the very start, it takes like a day to get it going. And by boiler, I mean the actual power plant for this ship. It's not a gas turbine, it's not electric, it's not a diesel generator. They use a massive fucking steam boiler. In fact, it has 8 massive fucking steam boilers. 8 of them! And you probably need a significant number of those to actually move the ship. And again, you just can't turn those on. I mean, ideally, if you had a shore steam connection you could plug into, which almost never exists anymore because most of your navies have correctly moved away from steam boilers, that might speed up the process to like 12 hours, but still, you've got to get the burners going, you've got to get pressure up, and this is all a very slow, complicated, complex process that involves a lot more people than even the new recruits who aren't that new could provide. And again, that's all assuming that the boiler is in perfect, pristine condition, which I guarantee it is not. Again, not the fault of the museum curators. It's simply not relevant to the ship being a museum. It doesn't have to move anymore. So everything has been sealed up, everything's probably been welded shut, and things that needed to be operated to remain in good operating condition haven't been in decades. I mean, you will literally have a problem of seals and gaskets no longer sealing or gasketing anymore. And when you're dealing with steam boilers, you don't want that. We are talking about steam that is so hot and so pure and so devoid of water droplets that in order to find steam leaks on these ships, the sailors would walk around with brooms, because when they found the steam leak, the steam was coming out of the pipe so fast it would literally cut the plant material at the end of the broom off. You don't find that with your hand unless you want your hand cut off. And that's just the boilers. Then you've got the 4 steam turbines that haven't turned in f***ing forever. The best cases are already seized up and you'll never get them running again. The worst case is they've corroded in really bad spots and you get them running and then they destabilize and explode. And then finally, I guarantee you that the main shafts for the screws are just locked in place now. They have settled and sat for so long that they are just perfectly one with every single gasket and seal and bearing and everything they've ever touched, and you are never going to get those turning. So yeah, you can have your rousing musical moment and the bold march of the old sailors across the wooden deck of the ship, and yes, this actually has a wooden deck, and they're going to all put their heads together and go, yeah, you f***ed. I mean, I question if the circuits would even work at this point. Unless you need them for lighting for the tours or whatever, there'd be no real reason to maintain them, and your little 4-legged rodent animals get everywhere and chew everything. And yeah, that's going to be a problem. I mean, the rubber would have rotted out of every single one of these quick-acting watertight doors because, I mean, they don't exactly need to be watertight anymore, which isn't a huge problem because this is basically a one-shot operation you're doing right now. But man, the whole ship is going to rattle the entire way to where it's supposed to be going on the boilers that are somehow magically running all together all at once for reasons aside from, well, you know, plot. Of course, amusingly, cutting away the chains that are tying the Missouri to the pier actually makes a certain degree of sense, mostly because the capstans on top of the front weather deck have probably seized into place and would never be able to raise the chain even if you wanted to uncouple it from the shore side. So yeah, you might as well get rid of the dead weight. You're not going to need the chains anyways. And here we see why the United States Navy's battleships are so absolutely ridiculous. We are on what is normally the main bridge of the battleship right now. You can see all the windows on the right side of the photo. However, looking over the captain's left shoulder, you can see what looks like a bank vault. Yeah, that's actually the armored core of the main bridge. That cylinder goes 3 decks high and was used for not only driving the ship, but also directing the guns, and the admiral sometimes had an office in the lower one. And yes, the armor is that thick. The plate is that thick. That's kind of why it exists. Normally, when the ship is just steaming around the ocean, there'd be guys outside of that armor with the big windows being able to see what they were doing. But once it got into combat, the guys would go inside that cylinder, that armored cylinder, and direct the ship from there. They might still keep people outside, which kind of sucks for the people outside, but still, the concept of a citadel is kind of key to the notion of a battleship. Some battleships had 2 independent citadels, fore and aft. Some had a unified one where it was all connected together. Some just had the one in the front. But basically, this is the core nugget of the battleship. I mean, battleships in general have obscene amounts of armor. But then you're putting another armored chunk inside of it, hence the term citadel. Yes, like your castles do. Think of this as the keep for the castle. You have the outer walls protecting the ship, and then you have the inner walls protecting the citadel. And yeah, navigation would be done from inside the citadel, courtesy of periscopes and whatnot, allowing the people inside to see out. Now, on top of the main bridge with the citadel, there's also a flying bridge up higher on the battleship, and then there's a secondary control station way back in the stern called aft steering that is like the last resort if all other bridges might fail. Yes, it's in the stern of the ship right above the rudder, for a reason, but we'll talk about that at some point later. And speaking of the general purpose ridiculousness of this entire situation, there is no conceivable way that this ship would still have live rounds on it. Now, I feel certain that they would keep a few dummy rounds, a few training rounds, just to show you Humies exactly how large a 16-inch projectile is, but they would still be dummies. They'd be inert. There wouldn't be any boom there. And speaking of big bada boom, there is absolutely no conceivable universe in which case a museum ship has been allowed to keep around her powder charges. Because yeah, that's what those three things being shoved up the barrel are right now. Battleships had a projectile separate from the powder, and the range and power at which the projectile was launched was determined by the number of powder bags shoved in behind it. But the powder bags are just that. They're bags. They're not exactly sealed containers, so you can't just leave them laying around, otherwise they'll accumulate moisture. And gunpowder or any other explosive powder, most of them absolutely loathe moisture. So yeah, leaving them sitting around will cause that problem. The powder will get wet and won't go boom right. Or the powder does what a lot of explosive chemicals do and decomposes into really interesting chemicals that you probably don't want to play with or shake very violently. And no, the projectiles and the powder bags would not be available at any arms depot anywhere because your United States Navy hasn't used battleships in, 20 plus years now? They don't keep that stuff laying around except in really dark, musty places where you'd never find it if anyone even knew it was there to begin with, because after all, we are talking about your government. And all of this is naturally assuming that the 16-inch guns on the battleships haven't been fully demilled, that is to say, made inoperable in non-repairable fashions. In fact, in your United States, you can, in fact, buy tanks these days, actual honest-to-God tanks. But unless you plan on paying a hefty tax and signing yourself onto an interesting registry, the actual guns, the cannons on the tanks, have to be demilled. They have to be rendered inoperative. They typically do that with battleship or museum ship guns too, for honestly obvious reasons. But anyway, since we've broken out the battleship with the guns that fire flying Volkswagens, yes, of course we have to have the boss battle with the massive alien mothership thing, control ship, dome ship. I'm not really sure. And of course, the big bad alien ship has all the pegs. Do they seriously not have another weapon? I mean, yeah, they're the spinny balls of doom, but aside from that, it's that and the pegs? Really? That's all you got? Really? And once again, everybody is way too close together, as this movie wants to do, although in this case it was not actually the Humies' fault because they hadn't actually realized that the dome-generating ship could move. They probably should have thought of that, but they hadn't really realized it. By the same token, the aliens' peg launchers apparently aren't turret-mounted. They're in these hardpoints that don't allow for a great deal of, rotational capabilities, which seems like a significant design defect, especially given how slowly this ship has to rotate in order to track the battleship that's trying to do a crazy broadside nonsense thing right now. But speaking of absolute and utter insanity, we have, instead of, bunker-mounted guns that can't track the target to save their blessed lives, we have an e-brake turn using your anchor. That's not how that works. It's, You see, anchors are kind of a weird thing for you squishy humies. Most of you probably believe that it is actually the anchor that holds the ship in place. The ship drops it into the water, it hooks on a rock down there or something, and that's what holds the ship in place. Nah. The anchor is actually what's holding the chain in place when you start laying out the anchor chain, and then the chain you lay out is what holds the ship in place. You literally put so much chain on the bottom of the ocean that it holds the ship in place, even in heavy seas or high winds or whatever. It's the chain that does the work. And yeah, the chain is really heavy. It really depends on what kind of class of ship we're talking about, but suffice to say, it's really heavy. Now, interestingly, the chain is not actually attached to the ship inside of the chain locker, because if the brakes holding the anchor up were to fail and the chain were to run away, you don't want it tearing out part of your ship on its way out. And that's why this particular concept of the whole e-brake turn using your anchor simply does not work. The chain itself is probably strong enough to actually withstand the stresses that are being imparted on it right now. The hawser that it goes through, that is to say that metal ring that it goes through, much less to the rest of the ship around it, no, you can't do that. I mean, technically, if any ship could do it, it's probably the battleship, simply because of how ridiculously thick the armor and the skin of the ship is, but you're still going to be tearing the bow right off the ship. And regardless, I don't care how strong that chain is, or how strong that hawser is, or how fast the battleship was going before all this happened. You cannot drift a battleship. They are 887 feet long with a draft of 36 feet, and you're trying to tell me that you can just push that massive wall of steel through water just because you want to. That's not how physics works, guys. I mean, yeah, You get this crazy, ridiculous shot of a battleship skating through the water, and then no. Just no. Unfortunately, if there's one thing to be said for the ridiculous weapon that are the pegs, it does seem to be that they're deliberately designed to penetrate armor by simply boring through it as soon as they can hit it. And yeah, the battleships actually have 6 inches of plate steel on their decks. And these things not only popped through that when they landed, which seems somewhat improbable unless the pegs were remarkably heavy themselves, they burrowed into it and then exploded and took out a turret. So yeah, it's an interesting concept and one that humans haven't really explored very much. Something similar, I guess, technically might be like a HESH round, high explosive squash head. You should look that up. It's a ridiculous idea. It doesn't technically penetrate the armor though. You don't have anything that hits the armor and then digs in, at least that I'm aware of at this point. And then finally, the Humies finally did the thing that they should have been doing from the very beginning of this combat, and that is take out the dome generators. You are cut off from your reinforcements and other forces at this point in time by that stupid dome. And yeah, you're all surprised and shocked that the dome generating ship can move and that it's an actual, ship by its own little self. But shoot the dome generators. Let your other people in so they can blow its face off too. Although, to get back to the absolute stupidity of Hollywood, what is it with you Humies and this idiotic notion that if you point two lasers or energy beams or whatever at angles to each other such that they intersect, they coalesce and then turn into a single beam, but only after pausing for a second? How did that notion get so stuck in your brains? Because it is so very wrong. I would try to explain just how wrong it is, but I think I lack the vocabulary. And in the same vein of being wrong, but almost right, when it came time to move a round from turret 3 up to turret 2 on the battleship, the chief rightly pointed out that the round weighs over 1,000 pounds. He's technically correct, which is the best kind of correct. It weighs 1,900 pounds. Like I said, they're flying Volkswagens. And no, there is absolutely no conceivable way that 6 of you squishy Humies could carry a 1,900-pound weight with no exterior handles and a smooth skin 500 feet through a battleship full of hatches and knee knockers and pipes and turns and angles and everything else. Each of those people is responsible for holding up approximately 300 pounds at the moment. You can't do that, guys. Come on. I mean, I'm sure there are some very fine specimens out there who could do 300 pounds with no handles in the current configuration that we're seeing right now. Yes, not those 6 people. I mean, I'm honestly not even sure if the normal corridors on the battleships were configured to be able to support the weight of the rounds. Honestly, don't know. The rounds weren't exactly loaded through the entirety of the ship. They were just dropped into the turret where they lived. And on a completely unrelated note, because as always, movies keep flipping back and forth, why are the helmets on the alien combat suits so easy to remove? I mean, there are clearly 2 different kinds of suits. There's the combat suit and there's the engineer suit. And apparently the species kind of differentiated in size depending on their specific role as well. And it's not tremendously clear if these combat suits are power armor or simply just armor. But regardless, why does the helmet pop off that easy? There should be at least a complicated method of doing that so, this kind of stuff doesn't happen, where some rando Humie can just pop off your helmet and blind you in the blinding light of a G-type stars. Oh my god. Although one thing to the aliens' credit is that their polymorphic ships, while they are probably a nightmare to maintain, difficult to fly, difficult to control, blah blah blah, so on and so forth, it does allow them for a certain degree of damage control recovery. I mean, the dome ship has been shot to hell and back, and is still able to put together enough bits and pieces to be able to extend its spinny ball of doom launcher. Again, mostly because of the polymorphicness. It was probably tucked away inside and they shoved it out of a hole, unfortunately. So if you do want to do the whole Con Noonian sing, "From hell's heart I stab at thee," I mean, these ships apparently would allow you to do that, so maybe you should have gotten a better ride. And once again, we see that despite all of the terror that the alien technology can induce in you Humie squishies, they still aren't actually that powerful. For example, these spinny balls of death and blades and crap can't even withstand a single hit from probably a Sidewinder. They probably put out enough heat that a Sidewinder could probably lock on. I mean, these things tear through helicopters and through ships and through everything else, and you can shoot them down with a normal missile. Okay, I mean, yeah, it'll suck if it gets into your ship, so don't let it get into your ship. Shoot it. Also, while F-18s can be used as bombers, they'd never bomb from that altitude, mostly because the guy in the front is about to fratricide the guy in the back by way of the explosion and resulting shrapnel that got launched into the air. Also because it's just not safe for a variety of reasons. But still, fratricide, that's a bad thing, right? And now that we've done all the blowing up of the aliens and blah 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 so on and so forth, we have to get to the celebrating what just happened part. For those of you who do not know, which is probably a lot of you, the Navy Cross is the next award down in your United States Navy from the Medal of Honor for your United States. It's equivalent to the Army Distinguished Service Cross, the Air Force Cross, and the Coast Guard Cross. I have no idea why Army didn't put Army in the name for their cross, but still, they're all basically equivalent. I'm not exactly sure why the dead brother didn't get the Medal of Honor, but that's politics for you. But in continuous terms of constantly getting it wrong all the way to the very end, if you are going to salute someone in your United States Navy specifically, please, for the love of God, do it correctly. From your elbow to the tips of your fingers, everything should be as straight as your little human bodies can make it be straight. Straight. All of it straight. And, at the same time, the tips of your index and middle fingers should be touching the brim of whatever cap you are wearing, because the United States Navy does not salute when they are not wearing caps. So, arm straight out, fold your forearm to wherever your brim is, put your fingers on it, tilt your fingers forward. None of this palm out crap. You should see your palm as you look at it from underneath the brim of whatever hat you're wearing. None of this bent wrist crap. None of this bent finger crap. Do it right. Speaking of doing it right again, the senior person always initiates the handshake and the junior person always initiates the salute, and they hold it until the senior person drops their responding salute. These are just the rules. And speaking of awards that make absolutely no sense, apparently the brother who literally saved the entire day, saved Hawaii, possibly even saved the planet, gets the Silver Star. Again, for those of y'all who do not know, the Silver Star is 3 grades beneath the Navy Cross. Now, typically, posthumous awards are typically higher up the scale than awards granted to living people, but still, that seems like almost kind of a slap in the face. I mean, yeah, his brother was a good guy. His brother got killed because he was dumb. Now, this brother isn't exactly a smart person, but he still managed to save the day, for heaven's sake. And in addition to not being smart, he is also not young. This movie started with him being 22. He then spent 4 years as an enlisted person and spent another 4 years at least achieving the rank of lieutenant. So we're at about 30. That's getting up there for, the U.S. Navy SEALs to be recruiting you. But hey, again, I guess it makes for a good story. Also, for the love of God, if you're going to go out in summer whites, put a t-shirt on underneath it. It's actually part of the uniform, the white t-shirt that goes underneath the whites. Yeah, that's actually part of the uniform. And not wearing it or wearing a tank top or wearing something equivalent to that is in violation of uniform regulations. Wear a t-shirt. And now we're done. Thank God. Now that we have all suffered through this particular movie, I suppose I should give my final recap on its value or perhaps lack thereof. First off, I do have to appreciate that a lot of the movie, in fact, as much of the movie as they possibly could, was actually filmed on the actual warships in question, or at least the types of warship in question. There was a lot of green screening, naturally. They did not, of course, take out the USS Missouri. You can't take out the USS Missouri. She's a museum ship. And as I have pointed out for the past, 2 hours, they got a lot of things wrong, too. Mostly about the Hume stuff, but I mean, theoretically, they got some of the alien stuff wrong, too, just because the aliens were idiots. Hopefully the aliens that you encounter will also be idiots, although maybe less technologically advanced. But the reality is that you Humies have a category of movies called popcorn flicks. These are movies full of large explosions and pretty people, and those pretty people causing those large explosions and doing crazy things besides that too. And you have this unerring, inherent ability to simply turn off your brain, eat the popcorn, and watch the flashy lights. It's a weird feature for your species, and it's intriguing that your entertainment industry has been able to capitalize it on as well as they have. But I will say that for just pure entertainment value, Battleship isn't horrible. It's not horrible as long as you don't mind screaming at the screen a lot. For realistic purposes, no. They get 1 out of 100 points. An attempt was made. But if you just want something to run in the background and looks occasionally interesting while you do something else, well, honestly, you could do a lot worse. I mean, a whole lot worse. Have you seen some of the movies that your Hollywood has put out these days, even most recently? They're, wow. I mean, they almost make Battleship look like Shakespeare or something, which actually is not that unfair of a comparison, given how Shakespeare initially meant for his plays to be received. There's probably some PhD thesis paper about how popcorn movies have been around for even longer than movies have, I suppose. And that's all from Sacred Cow Shipyards. Please be advised that any ship left on the dock for more than 24 hours will be compressed to a cube at the owner's expense. Have a nice day.